How's it going? My name is Michael and I want to welcome you as we explore the topic of apologetics. Whether you're a believer looking to deepen your understanding or a skeptic searching for answers or just someone who loves a good intellectual challenge, you're in the right place. Now, as always, I want to be clear. Apologetics isn't about winning arguments. It's about discovering truth, loving others through our answers, and growing in a deeper understanding of why we believe what we believe. Far too many apprentices of Jesus are unprepared for tough conversations about what they claim to put their trust in. And so we're trying to change that one conversation at a time. This month, I want to tackle what may be the single most important question in all of Christianity. Can we actually trust the resurrection of Jesus? Because, well, everything hangs on it. In his letter to the Corinthians, the Apostle Paul himself said, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. And the brilliant Timothy Keller once wrote, if Jesus rose from the dead, then you have to accept all that he said. And if he didn't rise from the dead, then why worry about any of what he said? Now, a lot of people today assume the resurrection accounts were maybe just legends, that over time stories grew, details got exaggerated, and eventually maybe a myth formed around Jesus. Honestly, on the surface, that can sound reasonable and pretty convincing. After all, ancient people didn't have cameras to record their experiences. They lacked a lot of the scientific understanding of how the world works that we've come to appreciate today. And so many assume they were just naturally gullible when it came to miracles or supernatural claims. But here's the thing, that explanation actually falls apart historically. And let me show you why. One of the earliest records we have of the resurrections isn't found in the Gospels. It's actually found in the writings of Paul, specifically in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, here's why that matters. Virtually every serious scholar, Christian or non-Christian, agrees that Paul's letters were written incredibly early. We're talking roughly 15 to 20 years after the death of Jesus. That's not enough time for mythology to fully develop, especially while eyewitnesses are still alive and able to challenge the story. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 to 6, Paul writes, for what I received I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Now, pause there for a second. Paul not only speaks of an empty tomb and a resurrection on the third day, showing that he's talking of a historical event, not a symbol or a metaphor, but he also starts to list the eyewitnesses. In fact, he explicitly says many of those witnesses were still alive at the time he was writing. He's essentially saying, go ask them. That would be an incredibly dangerous thing to write publicly if those people and things didn't exist. And remember, this wasn't hidden away in like a private diary. Paul's letters were public documents read aloud in the early church. Now, hearing that, some people will still say, okay, well, maybe all those eyewitnesses and disciples just had some kind of mass hallucination, or maybe they were just grieving, or maybe they just imagined Jesus spiritually alive in their hearts. And so maybe over the decades, those experiences evolved into resurrection stories. But there's a major problem with that thought, actually several. First, Jewish people in the first century did not expect a resurrection in the middle of history. The disciples weren't walking around expecting Jesus to rise from the dead 3 days later. That wasn't on their bingo card. When Jesus died, they were devastated. Their Messiah had been publicly executed by Rome. As far as they were concerned, the entire movement was over. Second, hallucinations don't explain the empty tomb. You see, Christianity didn't begin with only resurrection appearances. It also began with claims of an empty tomb. And that really matters because if there had only been an empty tomb, people could have assumed, well, maybe the body was stolen. And if there had only been sightings of Jesus, people could have assumed just, hey, these are grief-induced visions. But Christianity exploded because both claims existed simultaneously, an empty tomb and eyewitness encounters. Now, here's another detail people often overlook. Who were the first witnesses to the resurrection according to the Gospels? Women. That wouldn't mean much today, but in the ancient world, it would have been pretty shocking. You see, in the first century Jewish culture, women had very low social standing and their testimony was often considered unreliable in court. So think about it. If you were inventing a story to convince people, you would never choose women as your primary eyewitnesses. I mean, it would hurt your credibility. It wouldn't help it. Which means the most likely explanation is simple. That's actually what happened. The gospel writers recorded women discovering the empty tomb because they were sticking to the facts. Now, does all of this mathematically prove the resurrection? No. But here's what it does mean. Believing in the resurrection does not require blind faith. It is rooted in history and eyewitness claims that emerged far too early to simply be dismissed as legend. And at some point, every person has to wrestle with the evidence and answer the question, what best explains the birth and rise of Christianity? I mean, what do you do without a literal resurrection? How do you explain the empty tomb, the emboldening of the witnesses, the eyewitness accounts, the rapid rise of the church, and the willingness of so many Christians to suffer and die for what they claim they saw? Well, friends, let's keep asking hard questions, thinking deeply, and pursuing truth with humility.